All right, scholars, we are going to talk about topic 1.5, the ratification of the United States Constitution. Let's get into it. All right. Two big things we're going to look at today. Learning the compromises that were made, because the people who showed up at the convention in Philadelphia, they didn't all have the same ideas. A lot of them had different things that they wanted to accomplish while they were there, and they had to work together to get those things figured out. We're also going to learn about two of the main groups that were there, the Federalist and the Anti-Federalist, and what they stood for. All right, so let's go ahead and get into it. Let's start talking about these compromises. As a reminder, we had our Philadelphia Constitutional Convention in 1787. Most of the Constitution, remember, they started off trying to amend or change the Articles of Confederation. Rhode Island doesn't show up, the whole big thing. They end up starting to work together. They call themselves, the group that gets together, the Grand Committee. These are the committee members who are from each state trying to make this new Constitution. And we see our two big names here, Alexander Hamilton and James Madison. James Madison has the biggest hand in the ideas that are put forth into the Constitution. He's a really smart dude. It is actually often referred to as the Madisonian Constitution. So let's talk about some of these things that they had to work out, though, because not everyone, like I said, was there to get along. So the first thing is representation. We talked about in the Articles of Confederation how every place had one vote. Every state had one vote. And there was one branch, the legislative branch. So a couple of different groups bring different ideas to the table. Virginia brings this idea of a bicameral legislature, meaning there would be two houses in the legislative branch, and that each of those houses would be controlled by population, or the number of people you had in it would be determined by population. New Jersey, which is a small state, when I mean small, I'm not talking about geography, I'm talking about population. When I'm talking about Virginia, I'm talking about population. It's big. It has a lot of people. New Jersey does not have a lot of people, and they want a unicameral legislature, so one house, and they want equal representation, meaning everyone has the same say. And as you can see here, I ask on the slide, does this sound familiar? And Articles of Confederation should be going off in your brain. Like, they want to have a legislature that is very similar to the Articles of Confederation. So they have to compromise, and what they end up compromising with is this thing called the Great Compromise, or the Connecticut Compromise. I would emphasize knowing it as the Great Compromise. Okay? The reason they call it the Great Compromise is this was the hardest thing to figure out. This is where the convention almost broke up before it even got started. And so this is what they decide. They take a little bit from each one. They say for the Virginia plan, we are going to have two houses. We're going to have a bicameral. But instead of where Virginia wanted both houses based on population, we're only going to make one based on population. And we're going to have the other one based on equal representation. And what I'll just show you is on here, you've got links to the Constitution where it will take you to the point in the Constitution where you can see they set up the House of Representatives to be population-based, where they have it to be, the Senate to be equal representation, like actually in the Constitution. All right, so that was the Great Compromise. All right, let's keep on going. Our next problem is how slaves were going to be counted as part of the population. Obviously, the North has significantly fewer slaves and does not want them to be counted as citizens, where the South has more slaves and do want them to be counted. Not as, I don't want to say as citizens, but as citizens as far as voting goes. All right? So, this is what I want to make sure that you understand. The South wants slaves to be counted in their population so that they will have more power. Remember, we just learned back here on this slide that there's an entire house in our federal government, our national government, and if you have more people in your state, you have more power in that house. And so that is what the South is thinking, is hey, we can get more power in the House of Representatives if our slaves can be counted. The agreement that has come to is what is known as the 3/5 Compromise, all right? And I'm just going to pull this up real quick and show you 3/5 Compromise. Sorry. Right here. Right there. Representatives and direct taxes shall be apportioned among the several states. La 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 la. Tells you how to count them. It shall be adding the whole number of free persons, including those bound to service in terms of years. Okay. It does not count Native Americans who who are not taxed, and also 3/5 of all other persons. This is how they avoided saying slavery and slaves in the Constitution. They said other persons. All right, so that is the 3/5 compromise. We got another one. All right, problem number 3 is going to be what we call the economic compromise or the commerce slave trade compromise. All right, so I'm just going to bounce back here. Sorry about that. The northern states, they want to stop the slave trade. All right, they are thinking that it's not going to, they have a lot of ports up there, and so they are all about imports and exports of more like physical goods, where the South is utilizing a whole bunch of slave labor for their agriculture. Agriculture is the base of their economy. And what we end up happening is, and this actually goes into the Constitution, it says that the slave trade can continue in the United States until 1808. Like, it's actually, it's 20 years from the time that it is passed, but this is what I'll show it to you. It's right here. All right. Right there. Section 9. The migration of such persons as any state now existing shall think proper to admit shall not be prohibited by the Congress prior to the year of 1888. But a tax or duty may be imposed on the importation. What I want you to see here is this, is that the government saying, hey, we can't stop you from importing slaves, but we can tax you for doing it. This is something that's going to matter to slaveholding states down the line. But I want you to see here that this is kind of a deal that the Northern Coalition makes with the Southern Coalition to try and hold the government together. It's kicking the can down the road is another way to put it. All right, our last compromise we got to know is how presidential elections. There are going to be some who believe that we should be under a parliamentary system where we choose the legislative branch, and then from the legislative branch, amongst themselves, they choose a leader to preside over them. Okay, a lot of times they call these prime ministers in like countries that have parliamentary systems, like the United Kingdom or England. The populists are like, hey, I got an idea. Why don't we let the people vote for the president? Crazy idea, right? What we end up coming to is the solution called the Electoral College. All right, the Electoral College is in place to make sure that the people don't go too far and like vote some radical candidate. Also, I want to make sure you get this because this gets lost in our studies a lot. Like, the states at the time were supposed to be seen as these very powerful groups. All right. We, ever since the Civil War and kind of coming back together, we see ourselves as a United States. It really peaked after World War II, but we see ourselves as a United States, where instead they're more having a whole lot of state pride. All right. So those are our main problems, our main things that needed solutions. We're going to skip on down here and talk about the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists. Now look, this Constitution, the Madisonian Constitution, sets up a federal form of government, all right? One where the states have certain powers and the national government has certain powers. So obviously the Federalists are going to think that the Articles of Confederation are too weak, all right? They want to be able to have a stronger central government or a strong federal government. And that's why they want to ratify the new Constitution. You see, this is like a train of thought. And what I would just get you to see here is this. They are okay with the Electoral College because they are worried about the people messing this up. Like, they really think those who are, I mean, you got to think, this is a small group of really smart people, and they think a small group of really smart people should be the ones who are making all the decisions, and worry if we let the commons make too many decisions, they're going to mess it up for everyone. All right? And they also think their Constitution is so good that they don't need to worry that people's individual freedoms are going to be protected. Okay, now let's talk about this other group, the group that did not want to ratify the Constitution. They are called the Anti-Federalists. They are against setting up a federal government, a government where states and national share power. They want the states to remain the power. A lot of Anti-Federalists are really for the Articles of Confederation, a government or a founding document that emphasizes the power of the states. They thought that the central government was too powerful. We're going to talk about this. They had two clauses that really bothered them, the necessary and proper and supremacy clause, that are really going to bother the Anti-Federalists, that are written in our Constitution. They want the people to decide. Because remember, this is what you got to know about the Anti-Federalists. They are worried about individual liberties. That is what they care about. That's why they want the Bill of Rights, so we can guarantee our individual liberties. They want one of our individual liberties to be that we can vote for the president. And they think that states have a lot better way of protecting individuals than a national government does. And that's the basis of their argument. Now, you see the Bill of Rights. This is like amending or changing the Constitution. One of the big debates that's happening at the Constitution is, should we be able to change this? Or what should we do? Because remember, Articles of Confederation, everybody had to agree to change it. That's no good. So they set up their own amending process in Article 5. And this is way simpler. All right? This is what you need. All right. Now, look, there is several, and I have marked it in here for you. Okay. There, you can go in there and read Article 5 if you want to. It is very short. It's a paragraph if you want to see all the ways that the Constitution can be amended. But there's one way you need to know, because there's one way for all of American history it's been done. And this is it. It's a two-step process. Remember, we're talking about this in federalism, so the national government's going to have a part, and the states are going to have a part. So the national government proposes it. Both houses, the Senate and the House of Representatives, 2/3 of their members, if they vote to amend the Constitution, that is the proposal. But where does it go from the national government? It goes to the states. Remember, in the states, we have governors, we have assemblies, we have our own state Supreme Courts. We've got 3 branches just like they do. And we have state legislators just like there are national legislators. And 3/4 of the states, all right, which is 38 currently. 38 states now would have to say, I want to pass this amendment to amend the Constitution. But what you don't need to know 38, you need to know 3/4, because they set it as a fraction, so it doesn't matter how many states we have a set system. My little thing that's highlighted there for you is an easy way that I use to remember it. I usually draw it as a fraction. I can't do it in here, but I usually do 2/3/4, so that I can remember at the beginning, it's 2/3, and that's the national government, and then it's 3/4 for the states. So that is our amendment process. You can change the Constitution. It has been changed 27 times. Only 27 times, we'll say. All right. We will talk about this at a little bit of a later time. Government surveillance is one of those things that's a big deal when it comes to, like, you know, our individual rights. Like, are they in, like, how would the anti-federalists feel about, you know, them like digging in our phones for data and looking at our text messages and stuff like that? And I mean, soon we're going to talk about how, you know, federal governments are involved in schools, which are primarily a state institution. So after this, I mean, we talked about our 4 compromises. You need to make sure you know those 4, okay? And you need to know the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists, particularly what the Federalists stood for. They want the new Constitution. Obviously, if they want the new Constitution, they think the Articles of Confederation is bunk, okay? If they want the new Constitution, they're also for a strong central government, because that's what it sets up. And they're pretty haughty. They think that, you know, their Constitution is pretty great. They don't need anything added to it. The Anti-Federalists, they got one thing. They're like, what about the people? We want the people to vote for president. We want the people to have their rights protected by the Bill of Rights. We want the people to remain powerful, and we think that holding on to the Articles of Confederation will do that. And obviously, you can't have 2 constitutions. You're either on Team Articles of Confederation or Team Madisonian Constitution. All right? I hope you all have a wonderful day. You're smart, beautiful, wonderful.